Upon examining my father's bank account, I discovered around $600 million. But my husband was saying, "This money is all mine now. I don't need you anymore." While I was still mourning over my kind father-in-law, my spouse casually told me he was filing for divorce. It seems that he exposed his true nature as soon as he obtained the $600 million inheritance. He treated me like an ATM, waiting for his father to pass away so he could enjoy a lavish lifestyle without having to work. Although I had previously witnessed glimmers of his actual character, I had no idea he was that awful. I clenched my hands, angry at myself for letting myself get tricked into this marriage. I could live with being duped, but I could not stand it when he disparaged my loving father-in-law. I hesitantly signed the divorce papers that he had given me, mumbled, "Fine," and tossed them back. I informed him, "The rest is up to you." "Yes, let me handle it," he smirked in response. I ignored his offer to send me my items, exited the living room, and walked out of the house. I knew that my spouse would be sorry to see me go. As fate would have it, he contacted me later, looking terrified when I told him the $600 million was all smoke and mirrors. "I'm Catherine and I'm 45. I work in sales. Brian, my 45-year-old spouse, used to be in sales but now stays at home. His journey to become a stay-at-home dad has a history that begins with my first marriage. I'm married twice now. 5 years ago, my first husband passed away in an accident at work, leaving me a widow. I got roughly $600,000 in life insurance and severance money. I got married in my 30s, which was a late age to have kids. My ex-in-laws informed me that they didn't need the money because they were nearly 82 years old and didn't have much time left, even though we both inherited it. Since my ex-brother-in-law and his wife shared a home with my ex-in-laws, I couldn't tolerate it and made the decision to give them the money. But they also stated, "You should use it since it was my brother's money. We don't need much." They only pocketed a little percentage of the cash. Ultimately, the majority of the money came to me following the payment of a substantial sum in inheritance taxes. By the time I was 41, my career and our money had helped me become quite well off. Even yet, when I was alone at home and looked at my bank account balance, I felt empty. There was nobody there when I got home from work, and there never will be. The bed next to me remained precisely made, exactly as it had been before I fell asleep. I cooked breakfast for two by mistake, and that was the hardest part. It occurred to me as I bit into the second slice of bread. This must be what it feels like to have a hole in your heart, I thought as I was eating breakfast. I had to keep working even though I really wanted to take a break. I returned to work feeling empty, within and with a persistent sense of emptiness. My present spouse was the person who listened to me when I so badly needed someone to. He remarked, "I'm sorry for any inconvenience," when I informed him about my husband's death and the need for me to take some time off. No, it was not at all an inconvenience," I hurriedly retorted. "Your spouse was fortunate to have someone who gave him such much attention. He must have been delighted." He continued by giving some personal information, stating, "As for me, I'm bad at relationships. Even when I do go on a date, it ends soon. It seems difficult to alter who you are, even if I know it's a result of my irresponsible personality. Before we got to know one another better, my husband and I were just professional acquaintances. I ended up telling him everything when I visited his workplace, since I knew he was a joyful person. Usually, I would find a narrative this dark and serious off-putting, but he listened calmly before making me laugh with some light-hearted remarks. His grin and words appeared to somewhat replace the void in my heart. We started getting together after work, and he kept listening to my stories. I dropped a receipt accidentally one day while we were chatting, and he joked, "Wow, my wallet is twice as thick with coins." "You misplaced a receipt." We both chuckled. "I need to organize it, but it's such a hassle," he said. He pulled out some cash at a store, and as he tried to pay, receipts began to fall out. I retrieved the receipts and returned them to him, but he grumbled about the money and shoved them back into his wallet. "Brian, you seem like a child," I slightly joked. "What? You know, I'm 45, he answered. He was a little irresponsible, as he admitted, but observing him, I could feel my heart heal slowly. We continued our secret meetings, and after a year, he confessed his affections to me. I was conflicted because it had just been a year since my first husband's death, but I had the impression that he was urging me to move on and not become stuck. I thus made the decision to date Brian. Though those around us had other ideas, I started to recover once I made that crucial choice. But a month later, Brian expressed even greater anxiety to me and required me to make a very significant choice. "Aren't we supposed to marry? We should make a decision as soon as possible because of our growing age." I was unable to hear my late husband's guidance this time. I had the impression that he was encouraging me to follow my gut and keep going. That's why I chose to get married to Brian. I surprised myself by saying, "Okay, let's get married," and by how swiftly I made that choice. I was probably just picking up on Brian's personality. I began to believe that if being a little irresponsible also made me feel better, then it wasn't all that horrible. Brian taught me that excessive carelessness might have negative effects. "Wait, you live with your dad?" I inquired. "Yes, it was just lately. He became ill and needed my assistance with everyday tasks. He continued to work past the age of 73, believing that he was still youthful, and now this has happened." "How is your mother doing? Is she assisting him as well?" "Well, why didn't I bring it up? My mother isn't here. I haven't seen her since my parents were divorced when I was a little child," he said sadly, making me feel sympathy for him. "I've never heard of it before. I apologize. I don't mean to offend, but this is a serious subject to discuss when we weren't sure whether we would get married." "Isn't it something that I should have asked him first?" I thought to myself. "I thought I would inform you later." "You had the option of telling me about your parents, even if you postponed discussing living together. I would have been aware that cohabitation may be a possibility." I was getting slightly irritated. "Well, let's not worry about the little things. Simply meet my dad, and after that determine whether cohabiting is all right or not." "And what if I say I can't live with him?" Brian grinned and added, "We'll figure it out then." But I was unable to reciprocate. "I don't intend to indicate that I don't want to live with you once we are married. All I want is that you inform me of these crucial details sooner." I used to think that being reckless wasn't all that horrible, but it turns out that it isn't. Ultimately, Brian proposed that I meet his father, and I accepted. And that's when I started to see what he meant by little details. I said, "Your house is pretty big," when we went to his house to meet his father. "Just a little bit. Dad and I are the only ones here, so we have extra rooms." "You are welcome to utilize any of the other rooms once you move in," Brian answered. I was a little worried since I was about to meet his dad for the first time. Brian ignored my emotions and proceeded to open the gate and make his way to the front door. His 3-story home was somewhat larger than those of its neighbors. It felt opulent to live there by themselves, the two of them. I believed it, but Brian didn't appear to think the same thing. "My dad is quite frugal. He ought to have constructed a larger home," he said to himself. However, I was too anxious to meet his father to verify his statements. "I brought her, Dad. This is Catherine," said Brian. I said, "Nice to meet you." "I apologize for greeting you from bed. Moving has been difficult recently," his father said. "Please don't strain yourself. It's all right. Don't worry," I said. Brian helped his father straighten his back. He didn't appear to be bedridden, and with some assistance, he was able to stand and move slowly. I was surprised to see how intelligent his father appeared, even with his physical problems. Catherine, you work in office equipment sales, correct? Selling the gear must be becoming more difficult with the shift to paperless offices, am I right? His father inquired slightly, smiling. Yes. Industry-wide equipment sales have been declining for about 11 years, so everyone is focusing on new services or business expansion, I responded. You should look to nations where there is still a need for fresh services, as the local market for equipment is nearly saturated. Integration of IT may be the best option. He said, I believe there's a system called MPS, is that right? I was chatting to my future father-in-law, and I forgot I was talking to him at all. The topic just naturally turned into work stuff. His father didn't press the issue of marriage too much. I think he was trying to be sensitive to how I felt. We had only been conversing for a few minutes when I started to appreciate him. I began to see why Brian referred to cohabitation as small stuff. I'm sure he knew I wouldn't be against his moving home with his dad. After we had been talking for about 30 minutes, his father observed, I'm starting to have back pain. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Catherine, but I have to get some rest. Kindly tend to Brian. He tends to talk a lot. Yes, I will, I answered. Was sure the appropriate reaction? It felt like his father ended the talk early so as not to trouble me more. I didn't want to bore him, so I held off on talking longer. I walked out with Brian, a little let down. Brian told me more about his father on the way back. Brian remarked, Dad is a serial entrepreneur. I said, a serial what? A repeat business owner. He establishes businesses, sees them through to sale. He's done it more than once, Brian said. You can just buy and sell companies like that? It astonished me. That's right. Millions of dollars are involved in selling a single firm. There is some loss on the sale since it takes a lot of money to start and expand a business. Still, Dad's had it pretty good. He simply detests spending money. Brian remarked, he could construct a mansion that would leave people in awe, but he doesn't. Don't you know much about his work? I inquired. He doesn't discuss his job or finances often. He never gave me financial advice or employed me for any of his businesses. He pampers me exclusively while he's at home. Don't you think he could spoil me a bit more if he has so much money? Brian answered back. Your dad probably has his reasons, I said. It seems that his father was a really remarkable individual. It seemed obvious that he would feel like the main attraction for Brian. Brian's father is an amazing man, and as such he was likely compared to him frequently, thus it makes sense that he would have some grievances. In addition, what made your mother leave? It's difficult to envision their marriage failing. Your dad seems like such a kind guy, I inquired. Mom desired an easy life and spent a lot of money. Dad never wanted to be married again since, after the divorce, people were only interested in his money. Instead, he concentrated on his work. Don't you think he could have spent a little more with so much money? Brian responded. I don't believe in spending money just because you have it, I said. I couldn't agree with Brian on this issue since, based on what he told me, it appeared that his mother depended on his father's wealth. However, I believe that he was speaking out of a sense of inferiority toward his father. I discussed living with his father with Brian later. At the moment, his father depends on Brian for support, and when Brian is at work, a house aide provides assistance. I assumed that in order to care for my father-in-law, my husband and I would carry on working and enlist the assistance of a home assistant. Brian, nevertheless, shocked me with an alternative concept. I want to quit my job and take care of Dad. Brian replied, What? Give up your work? But why? It stunned me. Don't you think Dad is such a wonderful person? All this time, I feel like I haven't done anything for him. I want to help him on my own, going forward instead than depending on a caretaker. I'll be more like a housewife, Brian clarified. I'll take care of the house too. Are you sure you won't regret quitting your job? I inquired. I would feel bad for not doing more for Dad. After he leaves, I can return to my work. He smiled slightly in response. I remarked, "That isn't funny," with concern. It turned out that my spouse did not harbor resentment towards his father, despite my first suspicions. Nevertheless, he had a genuine affection for his father. "If you're going to be a homemaker, you better handle the housework properly," I told him. "Leave it to me," Brian said, proudly protruding his chest. I made the decision to give my husband the housekeeping since my father-in-law would pay for his own costs, and my salary would be plenty for the two of us. All went according to plan when we were married and moved in together. Brian took care of the house while I was at work. In addition to helping his dad, he took care of the household duties and the money. He would respond, "You're tired from work," when I tried to assist. "I'll take care of the housework. You should go and take a nap." My father-in-law continued to be gracious and gave me a lot of insightful anecdotes. Our remarriage was proceeding smoothly, but I observed that occasionally when he saw Brian doing housekeeping, my father-in-law would scowl. Brian started to neglect the housework a month after we moved in together. "Once more you're dozing off on the couch. Have you not been there all day?" I inquired. "Not at all." Brian attempted to justify himself by saying, "I went to the bathroom and to get water from the refrigerator when I was thirsty." "That's not what I meant to say. How about dinner? Have you gone food shopping?" I inquired. "Don't worry, dinner is ready," he answered. I took a quick peek into the kitchen, but nothing seemed to be cooking. On the dining table, all I could see was an empty container. He had obviously been sluggish all day. This is what Brian meant when he said, "Dinner's ready," right before the intercom sounded. After grabbing his money, Brian headed to the door. I was too shocked to say anything. For the first 3 weeks of our marriage, Brian had tidied up the house with diligence, but then he gradually stopped doing anything, leaving me to cook, clean, and do laundry. Someone with a reckless disposition usually gets off to a great start before faltering. I was so excited about getting married that I didn't think this would happen, but my father-in-law must have known all along, since he scowled when he spotted Brian cleaning the house. My father-in-law started apologizing to me as my husband started splitting up the work, saying, "That boy is so careless. I apologize profusely, Catherine. I thought that with marriage he would grow up to be more responsible, but it looks like he's only making things worse for you. Feel free to eject him if he starts to bother you." "I wouldn't do that," I retorted. "It's all right, actually. I apologize for attempting to correct him, but he's just, you know." "But he isn't neglecting to help you, right?" I asked my father-in-law. "No, he does help me at least a little," he said, observing a tiny shift in my father-in-law's facial expression. Although Brian wasn't neglecting his father entirely, it was evident that he wasn't doing a thorough job either. Nevertheless, my father-in-law was presumably trying to diffuse tensions between us by downplaying the circumstances. "I apologize," he said. "No, father-in-law, you don't have to apologize," he answered. My father-in-law abruptly changed the topic and spoke in a more upbeat manner to diffuse the awkward moment. "Oh, I'm doing some end-of-life planning and I need your help. Brian isn't someone I trust with it." "End-of-life preparation? It's not quite as bad as it seems. All I want is to stay out of trouble later," I thought to myself. "I got it. Please let me know if there is anything I can do to help." We ended up avoiding conversations about chores, and Brian, since talking about him made us both nervous. Though there were other nice acts that made me smile, this one felt unsettling. My father-in-law inquired, "Is there anything inconvenient at home?" "Not really. However, some repairs could be made to the bathroom." I answered, "I just wanted the water heater checked." However, my small remark grew into something much more. "Wait, what's this?" I was ecstatic to see the changes. My father-in-law fully remodeled the bathroom after getting in touch with a contractor he knew. The shower and tub were rebuilt, but the flooring and walls were also refinished with dirt-resistant coatings, and the drain was modified for simpler cleaning. To make it easier for my father-in-law to enter and exit, they even constructed a bath lift. Now I can enjoy a nice clean bath, and it's easier for me to get in and out, he stated. Although it was an expensive use of funds, there have been a few instances where a modest request resulted in a significant enhancement. My father-in-law taught me not to take minor kindness lightly. My spouse still thought he was stingy, though. Considering how lavishly his father spent money, I found it hard to comprehend how Brian perceived things that way. I was curious, so I questioned my father-in-law about his most costly purchases. "What's the most luxurious thing you've ever done?" I inquired. "In Germany, I founded a seafood business. The plant and office were completely rebuilt by myself. It was rather expensive," he retorted. "A German business? That seems like a lot of effort, but it's remarkable," I remarked. "Yeah and no. I followed my desire and did it. It resembled a pastime more." "Why is seafood so popular in Germany? Was it due to its profitability?" "No. I didn't consider earnings and I didn't have any contacts or information. We import a lot of seafood from Germany and export a lot of it." He was more joyful than I had ever seen him. "I love seafood, so I thought I could make money and eat all I wanted," he remarked. He had to have had a great time. However, he could have purchased as much fish as he desired if that was all he wanted. Establishing a business abroad appeared excessive. Is this how all successful people think? It's a universe much beyond what someone like me who is normal can comprehend. It helped me see that my father-in-law was merely frugal when it came to choosing where and when to spend his money. My spouse was just unable to comprehend it. My husband once barged into Kevin's room to express his annoyance at the two of us. "You grant Catherine's wishes, but you disregard mine." "Are you referring to the restroom? I take it. Do you also use it? Additionally, it really benefits you as a homemaker because cleaning is now simpler. Not only does Catherine benefit from a lovely bathroom, but I also find it handy." "Here, nobody loses," Kevin quietly retorted. My husband slammed the door behind him, gave a loud click of his tongue, and stormed away. "I really apologize," I said. "However, why do you ignore your son's requests?" I inquired. "He resembles his mom. He spends money carelessly when he has it. Even if you have a lot of money, you still need to know its worth and how to manage it." Kevin stated, his face growing serious. "I've tried teaching him that numerous times, but he's still the same. My spouse has gotten much worse since then in terms of his negligence. He quit doing anything around the house and began making needless fuss as well." "What is the name of the motorbike outside? Did you purchase it?" When I arrived home from work, I shouted at him, but he didn't even look at me. Instead, he was simply polishing an ostentatious-looking golf club in the living room. Instead of cleaning the house, my spouse started buying everything he wanted. If he had been using his own money, I wouldn't have cared, but he was accessing my bank account without authorization. Attempting to defend his conduct, he stated, "You get your requests granted by Dad. Let me have a bit of luxury, too." He had been a hard-working homemaker before we were married, so I hadn't noticed this lazy side of him. It seems that before our union, he had been concealing who he really was. I was duped beyond belief. I had informed him that he may utilize the funds in my account if my pay wasn't sufficient to cover our living needs. In order to keep him from accessing the money without my consent, I reclaimed my bank book. Upon verifying, I discovered that he had expended about $50,000 in just 3 weeks. The cost of not trusting him was high. Of course, I thought about getting a divorce from him, but I didn't want to entrust my father-in-law to his custody. My spouse seemed to get even more conceited when he realized I wasn't going to file for divorce. "Hey, why don't you head home sooner?" He grumbled. "I've been waiting for dinner all this time," scarcely getting off the living room sofa that he treated like a throne. He didn't even clean the home. I was starting to lose my sense of what it meant to be a stay-at-home husband. Even though he said he wanted to be a good son and didn't want to rely on a home helper, he ultimately hired a caretaker once more. To be honest, I felt better knowing that my husband wouldn't be left in charge of taking care of my father-in-law. I made the decision to keep as far away from my spouse as I could, reasoning that sleeping dogs lie. With this perspective, the time went quickly. Then something important happened to us both. My father-in-law departed, saying, "Thank you for everything," shortly before he turned 81 and passed away. Despite the briefness of our time together, I found it to be quite significant. We had been together for 11 years, it seemed. I felt a great emptiness in my heart and was unable to gather myself even after the burial. My spouse entered the living room beaming as I sat there, lost in my nothingness. "Hey, let's part ways." I was startled out of my thoughts by just one statement. He was displaying the divorce decree in my direction. It was neither a joke nor a miscommunication. "Dad's bank account was located. How much is in it, you ask?" "Close to $600 million. I own all of this money then. As an ATM, you are no longer required." He scoffed and threw the papers on my face. "I sought for a wife since I didn't want to cope with caring for my dad when he passed away a year ago. I assumed that because you were still mourning the death of your former husband, you would be simply good enough." "I understand. That explains why you were in such a rush to tie the knot." "That's a portion of it. However, I later modified my plan." "I take it that you received money from your late husband? I assumed his retirement and insurance would be big, but you never mentioned it. Until he died, I looked after Dad while you served as his ATM. Compared to working, it was simpler. With Dad's money, I will live a luxurious life now that he is gone." "Think you can get away with this, do you?" My temper was getting the better of me. "It's obvious that I can," he boasted. "Since I'm his son, it makes sense that I would inherit his fortune. He worked till he passed away. I had assumed he would live to be 87 years old, but he passed away earlier than I had. I'm fortunate then." I noticed that my fists were tightening. I could understand that I was to blame for being duped into marrying him, but I couldn't forgive him for speaking so negatively about my loving father-in-law. I was about to attack him, not giving a damn about the difficulties it would cause later, when I thought I heard my father-in-law tell me to be calm. Nothing hurriedly needed to be done. "Okay? If you say so, just give me the divorce papers." I grabbed the papers from him, immediately signed them, and returned them. "I appreciate how simple this is. These I'll file tomorrow. We'll give you all of our savings." He gloated. "I've got $600 million, so take as much of that petty cash as you want." He said, "I'll file the paperwork and send you your stuff if you want," as I walked out of the home and past him. My wrath began to subside as I was leaving, and I felt a wave of laughing come on. My spouse would quickly come to regret our divorce. That $600 million was only theoretical. My ex-husband contacted me a few days later when he was searching for a new place to live and was sleeping at a motel. He exclaimed, "Hey, what the hell did you do?" He began to yell, and I snatched the phone out of my ear out of instinct. I had to clarify everything to him because it appeared that he was perplexed. "Why don't you tell me what happened, even though I can guess?" I inquired quietly. "They claim this money cannot be removed when I attempted to take money out of Dad's account. What is happening? $600 million ought to be contained there." He spoke with a frustrated tone. I said, "Since your dad didn't spoil you and never discussed his work with you, it looks like you never took an interest in his affairs. Put an end to the puzzles. There is money," he insisted. I answered, "Yes, there is $600 million, but you cannot access it because it is collateral." "Collateral?" he questioned, his voice faltering. "You're right. The funds are in the account, but they are as secure as pie in the sky. Furthermore, that money will soon be gone since it will be utilized to pay off debts," I clarified. "You're not serious. I'm not allowed to utilize any of the $600 million. He was getting worried, and his voice became quieter. My knowledge of the $600 million collateral came from my assistance with my father-in-law's last arrangements. If something were to happen to him, he had requested me to take care of everything. I had intended to use the $600 million to pay off his obligations since his death. But when my ex unexpectedly asked for a divorce, I handed the papers over to him and trusted him to see things through. My ex inquired, "What did Dad do with the $600 million?" I answered, "He used it for something he loved." "What does that mean?" he inquired, uncertain. At the age of 72, Dad made the decision that this would be his final work and invested his funds in his favorite venture, a German seafood processing and distribution business. He spoke about it all the time. He intended to spend his retirement here and trusted the locals to handle the management, but it was a complete disaster, and he lost nearly everything. He smiled and told me that was only natural since he didn't really know what he was doing. I clarified that he didn't regret the purchases he made with his money. He used his funds as security to get a $600 million loan to launch that business, but it quickly became indebted. He intended to get another job in return. Though it appeared unlikely, he didn't believe it. He saved enough money for retirement despite the debt. That's remarkable in today's environment, where many people suffer in retirement. But when he was organizing the business in Germany, his health deteriorated. The bank trusted him because of his track record of high-value transactions, so he renegotiated his payback schedule with them. He said they may have the collateral if he was unable to work any longer. They decided on a 2-year grace period, during which, in the event that he was unable to work, the debt would be settled using the collateral. Now that the year has ended, it's time to pay off the debt. I said, "So this $600 million is debt repayment money and will soon be zero." "That's right. Have you not located another bank account? One for expenses related to life ought to exist," I questioned. "Indeed," he replied. "I found one with $80,000 in it." "You are free to use that money. You inherited it." Thus, $80,000 was obtained from $600 million. With evident amazement, he asked, "Why didn't he prepare more for his retirement?" The $80,000 startled me as well, but knowing him, I'm sure he intended to add more if necessary. I responded, "He appeared capable of anything. It appears that you have not yet reviewed the will. My father promised to leave me around 20%. You may argue that it violates your right to inherit because we're divorcing, but I'd like to respect his desires." I noticed he was breathing heavily and said, "I hope you'll agree to the 20%. He was becoming anxious since he had assumed he would receive $600 million. But the sum was now steadily declining. Why did he squander so much cash? My ex was furious, saying, "He could have bought anything with $600 million. "It won't change if you yell at me," I said. Talking about that period made him the happiest, so he had no regrets. He did with it what he pleased. It was his money. He had no intention of complaining because he intended to pay back the amount. You just assumed too much and made snap judgments. "Why do you look so scared?" I inquired. The fact is that I used all of my personal funds because I believed I would receive $600 million. My account is depleted, he acknowledged. Really? It stunned me. Money that he hadn't even gotten yet had been spent by my ex. He was now unemployed since he was no longer able to rely on my funds after our divorce. It was suddenly clear to me why he was so terrified. "You can rebuild your life because you still have a house and a roof over your head, right?" I recommend it. "I have very little saved up, am unemployed, and am approaching 54 years old. What misfortune awaits me? Please, I beg you, assist me. You work and have savings, right? What makes helping an ex-husband right?" I firmly responded, "You're paying for your own actions by suffering." He pleaded, "Please, let's pretend the divorce never happened." But I hung up the phone, disobeying his requests. As I returned to perusing real estate ads, It occurred to me that possessing a thoughtless disposition was undoubtedly undesirable. My ex-husband unexpectedly carried out the will and awarded me $40,000 from my father-in-law's estate. That compensated me for the money he had stolen. He had undoubtedly dealt with the $600 million scenario and felt that fussing about $40,000 was too much work. Additionally, it appears that he resumed his sales career, albeit he didn't seem to take it seriously. His motivation was impacted by the shock of losing out on $600 million, which resulted in a lot of blunders. After a month of working under inexperienced managers and realizing the difference between his income and what he had lost out on, he left and started working part-time, barely making ends meet. His $600,000 in savings will probably run out, and I wonder if he's considering retiring. I don't care what kind of problems he gets into now, though. He will have to work hard because there is no longer an ATM for him. I moved out on my own and rented a tiny condo. Considering the $40,000 from my father-in-law to be a type of talisman, I deposited money into my bank account. I have no intention of using it. I get motivated when I see it in the account because it makes me feel like I'm bringing a little of my father-in-law's work ethic with me. I'll take courage from him today